Hello, everyone. How are you doing? My name is Brigida Toruño, and welcome to Uno Soul's Chat. I am honored today to be chatting with Beth Norcross, an Uno Soul, and she is the executive director of the Center for Spirituality and Nature. Hello, Beth. How are you?
Hello, Brigitte. So nice to be here.
Thank you. Thank you so much for being here and chatting with me. Tell me, how have you been doing? How have you been coping through this now over 1 year time of being in COVID?
Well, I didn't think I was going to make it through the first 6 weeks, but
I
we kind of got.
understand.
It's funny when you sort of get used to it. We are so adaptable, and I, as many people have said before, I'm one of the lucky ones or one of the privileged ones. I was able to stay put and didn't have to work outside the home, and so I feel pretty fortunate. And
Mhm.
so we got along just fine. I'm happy to be vaccinated and have a little more freedom now. So thanks for asking.
Well, I agree about the vaccine. I just had my second one, and it feels so freeing and liberating and like such a relief. I did have quite a bit of a reaction though, and I was hoping I'd be one of those people that didn't have a reaction, but that's okay. I kind of feel like, it was a little sacrifice in order to now feel this relief.
It's like you might have earned it a bit.
Exactly. That's right. Well, Beth, I know that the mission of the Center for Spirituality and Nature is to provide opportunities for deepening spirituality through nature and for nurturing loving relationships with the earth, which is such a beautiful thing. And I would love it if you could tell us about the center.
Well, I'd love to, and I could talk all day about it. Perhaps I could start by just telling you what the genesis was. I came out of the environmental community and then moved into theological work, and it was all very rewarding. And people are doing some really wonderful things out there. It felt to me that, however, that we hadn't quite gotten to the nugget, and that until we brought people back out into nature and built that foundation for action, that we weren't perhaps going to be as successful at making those big transitions that we're all going to need to make if we're going to confront climate change and some of the other thorny environmental issues that we have. So I started this very, very small by just beginning to take people outside into the natural world, and then it just grew and grew. And certainly during the pandemic, it's been, people are coming out to nature in droves, and of course they are, because it's such a nurturing place, it's such a healing place, a place to experience directly, in an unmediated way, spirit or God or whatever we might call that.
Yes.
So we've been doing that since 2014, I guess now.
Well, okay, 2014, so 7 years.
Yeah, yeah.
Wonderful. Yeah, I remember when COVID happened and it was March and it was still chilly. And I think that at some point I hadn't left my place in like 2 or 3 weeks, and I was, just being super careful about everything. And
Mhm.
so finally, I remember it was a chilly day and I decided to go out on a walk. And I at that point I was living on a lake. I live on a lake again, but that was a different one. So I went out to the lake and I did my walk, and I came across this tree, which I had walked by so many times, but somehow it talked to me. I felt like it talked to me and it said, come on over, I'll give you a hug, which I really needed. And so so I went to it and I leaned my back against it. And it was in such a way that I just felt like the limbs were just literally hugging me. And I was leaning against it and looking to the lake. And it was such a special moment for me. I just felt like, okay, I'm alive, this is good. Everything's going to be okay. And it was so meaningful to me.
I really love that because we talk about tree huggers,
Uh-huh.
especially in the environmental field all the time, but we don't talk too much about the trees hugging you back. And I love the way you put it, because that's been our experience during the pandemic with the folks that we're going out with. You said you leaned back and into the tree. And I think that's why so many people are drawn to nature, because we are leaning into the stability of nature at a time that's very, very unstable. And everything is changing and everything is in transition. But the tree doesn't know that.
That's right.
The tree's just being a tree, and it's going to be there. It was there yesterday. It's going to be there tomorrow. And you can lean back into the stability and the predictability and the consistency of the seasons and all of the non-human natural world. I love that. I just love that image of you're leaning back into the predictability of that in the midst of all of this stuff that is changing.
Yeah.
That's lovely. I might steal that if that's okay.
Oh, absolutely. I might even have a picture. I may have done a selfie when I was leaning against it where you could kind of see, unless I'm just imagining it because I imagined it. I mean, because, I sort of see myself doing it, but I'll check to see if I have a picture of that. Yeah.
It's funny because there have been all these articles in the paper about how people are out in nature and they're out in nature and they're out in nature. And of course, part of that is that we're cooped up and we want to go out. But I think there's something very rich and very deep and very old pulling people back to this space in this time. I think it's going to be one of the great benefits of this, is that people are rediscovering quite literally the roots,
Yes.
their roots and the rootedness of the natural world around them.
That's
I'm hoping.
right.
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. Beth, I know that pre-COVID that you were having monthly meetings in nature. I don't know if you've done that in the last year or if you'll be starting up again soon. I'd love to hear about them, and also kind of if you could walk us through maybe the flow of one of those meetings, how
Sure.
it goes.
Well, let me take the first part first, and that is that, what have we been doing during COVID? We have been careful over the last 6 months, but we're going outside, masked and distanced with smaller groups. The other thing that we were doing, which was really fun and that we could still do, and everybody who's listening could do, is what we call inside out programs, where we would have participants, 15, 20, whatever, on the screen with us, and we would suggest a spiritual practice, and they would run out to their yard and do it, and then they would come back and report on it. And so what was happening was that people were seeing their own backyards as sacred ground. That, it's our nature, I think, to want to go and explore and go to the Rocky Mountains and the Galapagos Islands and all these places that are away.
Yes.
But what was happening in these inside out programs, people couldn't go away. So they had to discover it right here. It was really exciting to see all the cool things people found in their own backyards. So the second part of that question is how typically, a walk would go. I mean, we haven't been typical for a while, although we do have a number of programs coming up, and we have a walk coming up that we're going to be doing with Leah Rampey, who has also appeared on your program here.
Yes, great.
A pilgrimage to our local sacred waters. And so what we might do is we would start with some silence, always silence, just to center ourselves. We sometimes then ask people to pick up something in nature, a rock or a cone or a stick that represents some kind of burden that they might be carrying that's keeping them from opening completely to spirit. And we ask them to put that into a sacred circle for the time being. And then we go off in silence again. And then depending on the theme, we'll stop a number of times with invitations, inviting people to do spiritual practices related to the theme. So in this particular one coming up in June, we'll do things around the theme of pilgrimage. So that might be drawing a circle and seeing what's in it. It could be climbing up to a high place so that you get vantage. It could be doing what we call a micro hike, which is hands and knees to see what's below us.
Nice.
A spiritual practice that we call what is it like to be you? Where you might find that tree, or someone might find something else in the natural world. And, what do you eat? Where do you sleep at night? What are you afraid of? And it just is a way of engaging us. So we go along like that for a bit. And then we always have a half an hour of quiet solo time where we give people an opportunity. Maybe we'll suggest a spiritual practice or have a journal prompt or something like that.
Oh, I love it. It sounds wonderful.
It's so surprising, Brigitte, how few people have quiet time, and that's who give themselves or allow or can allow themselves during the midst of all their other responsibilities. And so that's a very rich time. And we come back and we talk about it as a group if folks want to, and then we wander back to that circle where we left our burdens. I ask people if they'd like to pick their burden up again. Most do not. And then we'll have a closing and we'll ask people how they want to take this time back with them. How do they want to be changed by it? How do they, we don't want these to be one-off things. We want them to get inside of you. So we give people an opportunity to consider, to reflect on how they might like to take this experience forward. So that's the format, the basic format of that. Again, it varies depending on what we're doing.
Right, that sounds wonderful. So where does it usually take place? In what area? Is it in Virginia?
We're all over the place.
Oh, okay.
Certainly the ones that I generally do are in Virginia, Maryland, DC, West Virginia, that kind of range.
Okay.
But we do backpacking trips, weekend backpacking trips. We're up in Pennsylvania in May. I think I saw that actually that one had already filled.
Oh, good.
I go around and talk and speak and teach all over the place, all over the country, and of course online now we can be everywhere, and everyone can be with us, and that's changed a lot of what we're doing because we have a much wider geographic range.
That's right. Great. Beth, you have a Master of Theological Studies and a Doctor of Ministry degrees specializing in eco-spirituality. And oh boy, what amazing degrees.
Yeah, they're fun. They're a lot more fun than the math degree I got in college. I've had a lot more fun with these degrees than I did with linear algebra, let's say.
I bet, yeah. But I would love to know, can you tell us more about the degrees and, eco-spirituality? I have to be really honest, I hadn't heard of that. So if you could explain that, I would love that.
Well, it's a relatively new academic concept. I would argue that eco-spirituality has been around since the dawn of time. So
that's right. This
is a program that I cobbled together. There was not a specific major at Wesley Seminary in eco-spirituality or eco-theology. Although I'm proud to say that you can get a certificate now in ecology and faith at Wesley and all the other seminaries in the consortium in the DC area. So that's we're making some progress. But so I put this major, if you will, or concentration together in eco-spirituality and eco-theology. And what do I mean by that? Well, I was at seminary studying to be what I thought was a traditional pastor. And every course I took, the earth was present. I mean, the Hebrew Bible, of course, all over the place with the ark and Moses and the burning bush, and it was the creation stories. I mean, it was the Psalms. It's all about the earth. And every course I took seemed to be like that if I were willing to look, if I were willing to open my eyes. And so I just turned every course I took into an earth-based thing. And by eco-theology, I mean that, and eco-spirituality, both that presence, capital P presence, that's available to us and to the rest of the earth. That's something that's beyond us and within us, that exists in everything.
Yeah.
That's what I mean by eco-spirituality and eco-theology. Some people call it panentheism, fancy name for it. But don't you find that something's going on in the natural world? There's a stripping away that I don't think God is more present necessarily out there. I think we're more present. We're more open. We get confused sometimes, at least I did, with lots of liturgies and creeds. And at some point, it just, this for me anyway, it just makes more sense to be out there. I can feel it more directly.
Yeah, I completely agree. I feel that when I take walks, I just feel like it's a sacred moment, and I try to be very present and mindful of every step I take. And I've attended a few retreats on Zoom, like 5 different ones. I always do way too much.
Which was your favorite?
Well, I did a couple with Leah Rampey.
She's wonderful.
Yeah, and it was prayer. I think it was called Prayer in Nature, which of course is not
praying the earth. I think she did one
the
recently.
earth. Yeah. And so much of it was not just sitting and staring at the Zoom and listening to somebody lecture. It was, okay, now go outside, and just with the mission of walking very slowly, calmly, and it was wonderful, the things that you can observe. And I, like I said, I live on a lake, and there are so many birds and blue herons and even eagles and the Cooper's hawk, right? I mean, it's just so much when you pay attention, and it just feels like such a blessing. And I just sort of feel transported, to somewhere else. It's really an amazing feeling.
You put it beautifully. I'm going to say it back to you. It's just so much when we pay attention. There's that that wonderful book that many of us have read and read and read, Braiding Sweetgrass by Wall Kimmerer, and she talks about how we have to be attentive and open, and then let the earth teach us. I had to learn that. I teach some courses at Wesley Seminary, and I had to learn that it's the earth, or the spirit through earth, that is teaching, not me. But as you said, there is so much. It's almost too much sometimes. Do you feel that?
Yeah.
Do you feel you said transported, and it's overwhelming sometimes, but I can't get there unless I take a breath, quiet myself. And that's what we're trying to do at the center. Is there are a lot of people who are outside now, and how can we deepen that experience? How can we open ourselves more broadly to that experience? There are a few ideas that we have about that, a few practices, a few ways that can continue to help us see more clearly, stop more regularly, and just and experience more expansively. I think that's what we're trying to do, at the center. People are out there, so let's see what we can do now that they're there.
That's right. Yeah. I want to participate in your activities, so I want to get on your mailing list.
Please, if any of you or your listeners, just spiritualityinnature.org.
Okay, good. Good. And when we post this, we'll be sure to put that in the notes too.
I wanted to mention one thing that people seem to enjoy. We're doing a lot of different things, individual spiritual deepening, and we do a lot of work with churches and groups and so forth too. But I think the most popular thing, every Monday morning we post on Facebook, but also you can get it in your email, called Monday Note from Nature. And it's free. It's a quote and a picture.
Nice.
And we were very, very careful to try to make them meaningful and relevant to whatever's going on in the world. And people use them as meditations. We just did a meditation series that just ended at 8 o'clock on Monday mornings on these Monday notes. And people, again, that's how they start their week that way. They center their week. Okay, I'm going to start my week centered in nature. So
very good.
You might want to sign up for those, because people do seem to enjoy them and they don't cost anything.
Good to know. Yeah. And I'm a longtime meditator. I've meditated for 28 years. So it's something, I wake up and I automatically go there. And I think that with the retreats, they said, okay, go out and do a walking meditation. So that was nice to be able to do that with a very slow walk. And the other day I did a labyrinth, which they're so lovely. So, yeah.
It puts you in a space. It's hard to know. It must be something about our chemistry that just we're kind of lulled into that space.
Yeah, exactly. Beth, I would love to see if you could give us some tips that we could share with the listeners and viewers about practices that they can work on to get through stressful moments. Maybe, two or three ideas, if that's okay.
Yeah. Well, I think I'll answer that question this way. And I keep pointing to the website because there's just a lot of information I think that you might find useful. We have a list of I think there's 7, I can never remember, helpful hints to developing a regular practice in nature. So before I give you specific ideas of practices, there are a few hints to just getting started. And one is, and I think this is the most important one, is that remember that it is what we call in our family a get to rather than a got to. Mm-hmm. So often meditation of any kind, as I'm sure you know, but certainly that in nature, I have to do this. I told that woman who led the program that I would do this, No, it's something that we get to do. We get to go out to nature. Mm-hmm. This is something that we can turn it around. It's less an obligation and something it's a great treat. And so I think that's sort of one thought about it. And then secondly, I'll just mention one more helpful hint. You can look at the rest of them, which you found. You get up and you meditate. And so there are all sorts of opportunities during the course of the day. If you choose a trigger, choose a cue. When you get that cup of coffee in the morning, look outside and see where the sun is. Mm-hmm. 30 seconds.
Yes.
And that centers you, particularly in these times. Mm. Who knows what your day is going to be like? Who knows if the kids' school is going to be open or not? Who knows what family members you may or may not be able to see? Yeah. But the sun is there and it's moving. Mm-hmm. It's moving. And every morning you take a cup of coffee, you look out and you go, oh, it's over the redbud tree today. Yeah, it's moving north.
Yeah.
And that tying your practice to something that you do every day, if you eat 3 or 4 or 5 times a day, that moment, just take a moment. Where did the food come from? It came from the earth. Thank you. 30 seconds. Mm-hmm. So those are a couple of hints and also a couple of practices. So
wonderful. Very anchoring.
Yes. That's follow the sun, is the one, and then what are you eating is another. But there are many. We actually have a book
Oh, okay.
of 50 spiritual practices called Inside Out. There's
Okay.
information on our website, or you can get it at Amazon. And there are lots and lots of different. Some are fun things you can do with your kids, and others are more serious. And I'll just mention one, and that is that in the Jewish or Christian tradition, we have Psalms, of course, 150 Psalms, and a full third of them are what are called lament Psalms, and these are Psalms of grief. And we don't use them in our churches very much because we like the happy Psalms, but one of the spiritual practices that we suggest that you do is to write a lament psalm in the earth or for the earth or with the earth. So if you've lost someone during this time, if you're struggling with depression or anxiety, or you're just plain mad because, it's tough out there, you can take all of that to spirit, to divine mystery, to God, whatever you might call that, into the natural world and just write it out and get mad and let it go. In the Hebrew tradition, though, almost every lament psalm ends with, no matter how raw and naked and angry it is, it always ends with a note of hope. Yours may or may not, but
yeah.
So this grief is real.
Yes.
The grief around climate change is real, and we don't want to numb ourselves to that. So go out there and write a lament psalm. I've done this individually and also with groups. It's very, very powerful. So those are a few ideas.
Sounds beautiful. Thank you so much for sharing that. And just as in our closing, I would love it if you could leave us with some words of wisdom.
Words of wisdom. Well, that I think that I'm going to let the earth speak, actually. And I think that if I had some guidance, it would be that the earth, has been around, our earth has been around for 4.5 billion years. And the plants and the animals have been here many, many, many thousands, millions of years before we have been here. And they have figured out how to live on this earth in a sustainable way. And I guess what I would leave you with is that there is such wisdom in that tree that you leaned against, who was talking to you. There is wisdom. Sometimes it's direct. What do you have to say to me? But there's wisdom in the ecological processes. There's wisdom, for example, when a tree dies and it's left on the ground, it doesn't just decay away. It becomes a nursery for other plants and trees and mosses and fungi. There's actually a name for it in forestry called a nurse log. And there's wisdom there. We all know elders who have died, people who have died and left these legacies. And you can see it play out in the natural world in a really wonderfully direct, tactile way and if we look for that wisdom, it's there for us. It's just waiting for us to discover.
That's right.
So if I had something to leave with you and the folks out there, that would be it.
Oh, that's wonderful. Thank you so much. I'm so honored that we got to speak and to chat. And
it's been my pleasure. We could go on for a while.
yes, absolutely. I could speak with you for hours. And this is a powerful time for all of us to love each other, to unite, and to live in peace. And again, thank you so much for joining me. And I honor the light in you.
I honor the light in you as well. Namaste.
Namaste. Thank you so much for listening to Uno Souls Chat. You can find us at www.unosouls.com and on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. I would love to hear from you if you would like to chat with me. Have a beautiful week and see you at the next episode.